two-part talk to discuss the necessity for chemicals. Are chemicals ever needed as a pre-treatment or post-treatment in timber? And is there any other way we can address problems we have with biodeterioration in timber? So 3 parts. A first part, a brief introduction into biodeterioration. Second part, a brief history of the genesis of the remedial industry or remedial contractors, which are companies that specialize in producing and applying chemicals to buildings. And the last part was what I would consider a modern and more sensitive approach to building defect in building conservation. And this talk applies to the warm temperate zone that you can see there. I appreciate we have people with us in other areas, and the warm, the tropical and the subtropical. Of course, we have termites there, which is a whole different subject to what I'm talking about. So I'm talking specifically about what we would come across in the warm temperate zone. We don't have, in the UK, we don't have termites yet, but there are reports of them on the south coast, and they will probably become a problem later on. How's the sound?
Yeah, it's better. It's much better.
Good.
It's a bit fuzzy on my end. I'm wondering if you just maybe back off from the mic slightly. Try that
now. Does
yeah.
that sound a bit better?
Yes. Can
Right.
you sing? Can you sing a little song or something? Give us a test.
Testing. Testing. 1 2 3. 1 2 3.
Yes, it's good.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
No, that's all right. It's yeah. So the little intro to biodeterioration. Primary agents are fungi. Always fungi. Fungi will always be the most damaging part of biology that could potentially affect your structure. Insects are very much secondary. As I said earlier, we're not talking about termites here. We're talking about the insects you find in a warm temperate region, which I talk about in a bit. These are secondary agents, and they won't cause serious structural problems unless you're unlucky enough that they damage a tenon, for instance, that was exclusively made out of the sapwood margin of the timber, but that's very unusual. You will get problems with fine joints. That's where they can be a problem, where the timber becomes it's machined or cut very thin to form joints, mortises and tenons and things, and you can get water which will collect in an upturned mortise, decay the tenon, and which will give you structural instability. But again, arguably, it was the fungus first. The beetles came on the back of that. And less significant forms of deterioration, arguably it's biological, other chemical processes linked to crystallization of various substances, timber treatments, fireproofing treatments, and occasionally pollution, where oxides of nitrogen and sulfur can produce nitric and sulfuric acids respectively, which on the surface of a timber will cause the fibers to break up. A little introduction to how fungi work. Am I okay? Sound okay?
Yeah, we're good.
Good. Most decay fungi work on secretion of oxalic acid onto an already saturated substrate. So for a fungus to be able to break down the lignin and or hemicellulose, depending on what species of fungus we're talking about, the timber needs to be saturated. Here, this is an important slide because where my cursor is here, this shows water droplets on a hyphal thread. This fact has been used for a long time by principally the remedial industry, that fungi are somehow able to transport water to dry timber, where it will wet the dry timber up and then cause decay. These droplets are actually part of the mechanism where how the fungus controls hyphal progression through turgor pressure. So that is the little threads. They cover a substrate by the fungus effectively pumping water into it by osmoregulation and extending the hyphal network over timber. Sometimes it needs to redistribute water, or there's too much water and it will dump the water out of the hyphal threads. That's the water droplets you can see. This quantity of water isn't enough to soak in to a timber substrate enough for it to become saturated and the fungus to then be able to decay it. This is a very important point because much of the work that the remedial industry do in this country is based on this fact that, well, a fact they claim to be a fact is that they will show you a slide like this. They will say, well, look, there's the water droplets on the hyphal thread. That's the fungus transporting water to dry timber. It isn't. It's something completely different. There is eminent mycologists have now proved this, but they need to be listened to. I think I said earlier on, Olaf Schmidt of Hamburg University and Sarah Watkinson from this country, from I think she's Imperial College. They've done work on this and proved this point. This particular fungus is Serpula lacrymans, snake's tears. It is a specialist woodland fungus. So this fungus, well, 90% probably of fungi have evolved as a fungus of the woodland floor. So that is, they've evolved underneath the leaf litter to progress and decay timber that's like fallen dead wood. Obviously, there are other fungi that bracket higher up trees, but most of the fungi, the wood decay fungi, they're fungi of the forest floor. Serpula lacrymans is a very important fungus because it's a very vigorous fungus, given the right environment. So anything that replicates the environment that you might find under leaf litter on the forest floor, you've basically made a home for it. And so if we have behind skirting boards and architraves and cellars, you have a high stable humidity. That is the conditions in which the fungus first evolved, and so it's very efficient at breaking down wood. This particular fungus is fast growing and vigorous. Has a marylloid surface. It's resupinate, so it's facing upwards. It's an upside down fungus, whereas normally our idea of a fungus is like a mushroom or a toadstool, where the gills face down. This grows across the surface, and the contoured surface that you can see, that's where the spores are released in vast quantities, this particular fungus. Is my sound still okay?
Yep.
Good. So again, it's mycology in historic buildings is a huge area, and this is a very small, superficial introduction to it. The UK's principal wood borers are these three. Death watch beetle, Rufo villosum, that's red, that means red hair. If you look at the elytra or the wing casing of the death watch beetle, that they're tiny little red hairs there. Furniture beetle, woodworm, or some people generically call furniture beetle and death watch beetle woodworm. And the lictus beetle. Now, of these three, probably the one I see most activity in, and people are calling me out more, is the lictus beetle. The lictus beetle has a short life cycle. So the death watch beetle and the furniture beetle, they're anabiids. They have long life cycles. The larvae must stay in the timber for years to accumulate enough energy to be able to pupate and metamorphosize into an adult, which is obviously the last part of its life cycle. The powder post is slightly different. It has a much shorter life cycle. The powder post or lictus doesn't reinfest, and it just makes little holes and makes people a bit nervous. So people will have very expensive structures made with oak, and they will occasionally get these things, powder post, popping out, and of course the alarm signals are sounded, but they can't reinfest these animals, and so they will just eventually emerge and die. You might get a couple of emergencies over 1 or 2 years, but that would be it. The other two, furniture beetle and death watch beetle, if your timber gets wet, you have a chance of seeing these two. The death watch beetle, it's important to understand their life cycle. If you're seeing an adult emerge through a flight hole, then it was laid as an egg up to 8 years ago. That's why it's very difficult to make a knee-jerk reaction to an emergence that was a result of a laying of an egg 8 years previous. He's or she has bitten his way out with mouth parts. They have no throat. The adult doesn't feed, only the larval stage feeds. So the anabiids just bite the wood and spit it out and emerge, which is important when you're taking into account how you might try and kill this thing, because if you're relying on anything being taken into its mouth and into the stomach, such as boron, which needs to be ingested, which I go on to talk about in a bit later, it's not going to happen with an emerging adult because there's no throat there, there's no mouth, it's not eating anything. This is the damage you'll see from a powder post beetle. This is old damage. Quite often, the powder post beetle is associated with green timber. It's a starch feeder. So if a timber's been hanging around in the building for longer than, say, 20 years, the tree's metabolism will have depleted the starch. There won't be any starch, so there'll be nothing for the powder post. So generally, if a big corner comes off like this because you're hacking off the plaster or you've tried to put a fixing through a beam, the appearance of something like this with fine talcum powder-like frass, often lemony in color, it's powder post, and it means it was done many, many years ago, early on in the life of the timber. Right, so that was, again, insect activity in timber is vast. I mean, there's a huge section in the Historic England Practical Building series that Brian Ridout wrote, that you can get anything, a whole range of insects, not just those three I showed you. I mean, there's other important ones such as bark borers that unfortunately carried Dutch elm disease to this country, so that's important. You have colony insects that will find a home in already decayed timber, like ants and wasps and bees. Yes, so that it's a huge area. That was just a very small little introduction into insects. Hopefully it becomes clear why I introduce you to those in a bit. Biocides and their application. So we need to remember there's a distinction between timber pre-treatment, that's buying your timber already treated from the yard, and application post-construction. There's a problem, I've got something growing on my timber, I'm going to throw a biocide at it to kill the fungus or the insect. So that's an important distinction. And the idea of timber conservation, I would argue personally that this is quite a new thing we're talking about, and so I think probably in the last 100 years, because I'll talk about the genesis of the remedial industry. It's been going for about 100 years now. So yeah. So where did it come from? Why have we reached a situation now where the first thing that comes to mind if there's a problem is kill it? And it's not just in building conservation that we have this culture. It runs throughout our lives. I think it runs. We're not interested. Well, we are interested, but we seem to lose sight of a cause of a problem, and we become completely focused by the symptom. So where did this come from? Why are we obsessed with the symptom and not necessarily the cause? A little introduction into politics, paranoia, and the remedial industry. This is the Queen Charlotte. This was a softwood ship constructed in before 1810. Obviously, we were depleting, in this country at least, we were depleting our stocks of oak, and we started building in Baltic pine. The Queen Charlotte sank because of a mysterious new fungus that was growing above the waterline. Again, there's lots of reading up you can do on this. It eventually became named dry rot, which is because it was above the waterline. This has caused us a lot of problems. That nomenclature, together with the fact that you get droplets of water on the hyphae, put them together and you can make quite a scary fungus, whereas it probably isn't as scary as you're all thinking. The royal, as we all know, the military, most innovation and new inventions have some foot in the military, and so because this was affecting our navy, a lot of resources were thrown at the problem by the government of the day, and all sorts of weird and wonderful concoctions and reasons came up, were produced, and there was a frenzy to find out why our navy was sinking. They sort of figured out that they were using the wrong material, but it sort of became confused, the amount of, because it was the military, there was a lot of paranoia about it. Moving on 80 years, an eminent entomologist called Maxwell Lefroy, there was the death watch beetles in large numbers started falling out of the roof at Westminster Hall. And again, the government of the day, this was very bad. The government of the day employed Maxwell Lefroy to find out some way to kill the beetles. He went on to form Entakill, which became Rentakill, and he was very much involved with chemicals and finding chemicals that kill the beetles. There's a whole story around Maxwell Lefroy, which is quite interesting. You can Google him. Again, I'm not knocking anybody. the guy was a very eminent and capable entomologist. But yes, a huge industry resulted out of this. And here we have a lady spraying probably some nasty organochlorine on to her clothes in the wardrobe, a renticle product there, No5. This is the sort of thing that they used to make and sell. So that was new formula Bombay liquid with lindane and DDT, which both are particularly unpleasant organochlorines, and for very good reason are no longer used. You will be happy to know that if you are responsible for any structures that were treated with any insecticides or fungicides that contained organochlorines, lindane or DDT, that they're quite unstable over long periods of time. So if they were put there in, say, 1970, 1975, they won't be there anymore. I was asked to do a few tests on some material that they were worried about, and there was no trace of there were substrates that we knew had been treated in organochlorines 30 years ago, but they were no longer traceable. But I mean, yes, because they've gone into the environment, which is their bad point. Also in this we see pyrethrins. This is a pyrethroid, an artificial product formed from permethrin, which is from chrysanthemums. That's a nerve agent for insects. Anyway, we'll talk about that in a bit. So we have with us a very successful and very powerful remedial industry. They have got right into home guarantees. They are part of the establishment, I suppose. The reason being is because we had lots of problems with the building materials we were using post First World War. The timber was not very good quality, or it was softwood, and so this buildings made from these materials, if you put lots of water on them, bombed them, for instance, made them derelict, and like that happened in the Second World War, you would get epic growth of dry rot fungus, which would scare the living daylights out of anyone. And the professional marketing and guarantee. The guarantee was an invention, a master stroke by somebody that was, if you let me do this to your building, I will give you a guarantee on a bit of parchment paper written in an ink quill pen that I guarantee my work for 30 years. And yeah, it proved incredibly successful. Another little interesting thing here I put is folklore. It's played on fears that were sort of already around. Take, for instance, the death watch beetle. The death watch beetle, there's a whole body of folklore around the death watch beetle. In Germany especially, there's fantastic poetry about it. It's on. I've got a couple of blogs on my website, which has got a poem translated, an undated German poem about the death watch beetle eating this building around a poor mother and her child, and then it coming crashing down on them, and then they're dead. And that was, yeah. And just the name Death Watch. Again, you can, if you're interested, I got a couple of blogs called Death Watch Gothica that sort of explores that and explores the poetry and the folklore around it. So that all existed. That all existed hundreds of years ago. So of course, if you find a couple of death watch beetle on your windowsill, you're going to pay these guys to spray whatever they want on it if they're going to give you a bit of paper to say it's gone. As I said earlier on, though, the wood borers are secondary agents of decay. on their own, they can't take a beam out in the wall and cause it to come crashing down. That needs to be a fungus. So in this professional industry, here's some horrible shots of an intact Adam interior being stripped off. Presumably they found a bit of furniture beetle activity in the skirting, and so stripped the entire interior to spray all of the stud work. Of course, these are horrendous examples. Drilling and irrigation of masonry. Here there was some decay to the window lintel, so a new window lintel was put in, and then every single brick has been drilled and irrigated with fungicide. Clearly it's caused a horrendous amount of damage to the structure, and I still see this, and it's difficult to stop it. A job Vincent and I were involved with last year, I was jumping up and down saying, don't do it, and they did it because they can, you know, it's their house, and they drilled every stone, and they just did shocking damage to this listed building. Ed will recognize this. This is the north transept of Canterbury Cathedral softwood, where they've drilled and irrigated to inject insecticide, and of course the timber's so dense and of such good quality that the insecticide just spurted straight back out of the hole and dripped down the face of the timber. No insecticide was ever needed there. It's just jobs, and it's just, yeah, it's inappropriate to say the least. But this is the power of the remedial industry, that they walked into Canterbury Cathedral and caused that amount of damage. So, you know, they've got to be taken into account for sure. So when we're talking about treatments and pre-treatments, it's not a new thing. People have used pre-treatments for hundreds, possibly thousands of years. For instance, permethrin, which is a widely used nerve agent insecticide in many formulations of biocide, that comes from the petals of a chrysanthemum. Now, it's thought that the Chinese ground these petals up and used it as an insecticide thousands of years ago. It was definitely known of hundreds of years ago. But as I said, permethrin is now one of the main insecticidal additives in modern formulations. Pitch and lime have been used for many years, and the insecticidal and antifungal qualities known about for a long time. However, we get this change, the Industrial Revolution. Industrial processes started to make things like lead, mercury, copper much more available, and the biocidal qualities of these metals was well known, and they were then developed into very unsavory biocides. And then we go on one step further, beginning of the 20th century, and we get organochlorines, so we now know that mercury and lead are a no-no. We now know that organochlorines are a no-no. Organochlorines being things like DDT, lindane. Boron is boron, or should I say boric acid, which is a derivative of boron, is used now as a sort of like a cure-all. It is quite an effective biocide. It is an ergosterol inhibitor in fungi, so it stops fungi being able to grow by inhibiting how it breaks down its nutrients. and it also not only kills fungi, it will also kill insects, but it needs to be ingested. So it's a stomach poison for insects. But boron is sort of like it is widely now. You will find most insecticides are based on boron, permethrin, and also azoles, which are very effective antifungals developed in about the 1940s, the 1950s. There's a whole range of them. It's the same group that you sort of like, you know, put on your athlete's foot, and you're sort of like your yellow nails. It's the same group of chemicals. Again, it's an ergosterol inhibitor, very effective. So that's a very, very quick chemical summary. Some of the chemicals there, like boron and permethrin, have low mammalian toxicity. Some of them have very high mammalian toxicity, hang around in the environment for a long time, and thankfully, you know, are no longer used. Yeah, so part 3, the modern approach. So yes, so somebody might say to me, okay, clever clogs, can't use any chemicals, so what do we do? So I'm not actually saying don't use any chemicals. What I'm saying is take a step back and consider the timber. First of all, we're talking about the timber. This slide, you can see it's a freshly felled, fast-grown bit of pine. You will note how the fungi and the moss is only able to colonize the outer sapwood margin. This is because the internal section, the heartwood, is a closed system full of extractives. Extractives being the byproducts of the tree's metabolism. Things like terpenoids, which is synthesized to make turpentine. Pretty nasty stuff. And as you can see from this cut face, the fungi don't like it. None of the growth likes it. This is why it's so important that we use, well, this was known about, this has always been known about. We've always known that the sapwood margin of a timber, you don't really want to use it. It's going to fall to bits quite quickly through biodeterioration. And we've always known that the heartwood is the stuff that carries its own protection. So if we understand the wood and the anatomy of the wood, that gets us part way through it. Understanding the fungus. What fungus are we talking about? What conditions does the fungus need? As I said earlier on, for the fungus to cause damage to timber, it needs the timber to be already saturated, fiber saturation. In this slide, we see dry rot mycelium. There was a prolific outbreak of dry rot in the room next to this. And the mycelium had progressed through the masonry and then was growing on the underside of the floor. But this floor was dry. The timber was dry. The timber is absolutely sound underneath this mycelium. But it's thought of as sort of like a contact cancer. So in most cases, a floor like this would be cut out. And if it's a historic floor, you'd be losing a lot of historic fabric. So in this case, we just scraped the mycelium back and persuaded the client to keep the floor. I think it's still there. I hope it's still there. No, it is. It's okay. Everything's still okay with this floor. Understanding the insect. Now, if you have, let's say, a problematic occurrence of something like furniture beetle, that can be a problem if it's nibbling away at a sapwood edge of a floorboard and people keep putting their foot through the floor. That is a health and safety issue for sure. And as the name suggests, they can cause problems to finer bits of timber like furniture, hence the name. Or if you if you go into your bedroom and you find there's a handful of death watch beetle on the windowsill, most people, their instinct would be to get an effective insecticide and just blast the whole house. Get rid of everything quickly. Belt and braces, as we'd say in English. This can compound a problem that might be quite minor, that usually is quite minor. The slide here is of a Fulcus spider predating on a death watch beetle. What it does is it waits. Spiders somehow. On my YouTube channel, there's a little video of me showing about how spiders have this uncanny knack of spinning their webs right where an insect's going to emerge. It might be a much quicker thing than that, because some insects can take several hours to emerge. So it might be that the spider, the wandering predator, knows what's happening, spins its web, and then catches. In the case of the Fulcus spider, will catch it in a web. If you go and spray insecticide willy-nilly all around your building, you will kill the predators. You will kill the Fulcus spider. You will not kill the larvae that's inside the timber. So you will kill all the predators, all the natural predators of the emerging beetle. And quite often houses are little ecosystems, and the nature is in balance. And if you go and wipe out one particular set of species, the predators, you could well have a problem. This is the house spider. The house spider isn't such a polite eater. So the Fulcus will catch the beetles in its web and roll them into a little lozenge and inject and liquefy the contents. The house spider just breaks them up with large fangs. Again, very effective predator of death watch beetle. And as I alluded to earlier on, understand the animal, understand what kills it, why it's there, when it was laid as an egg. Again, you can't really take a knee-jerk reaction against a death watch beetle emerging, because, as I said, it was laid as an egg 8 years previously. What is your intervention achieving? So many properties I go around, they have what we call blunder traps. These are little cardboard boxes using sex pheromones as an attractant, and they're sticky pads. These are meant to catch the wood borers. What they do is they capture the wandering predators. So they capture our friends, basically. So here we have millipedes, earwigs, and lots of spiders, all which would predate on death watch, all killed because they've stumbled into a blunder trap. You'll also note that there's no wood borers there, just the predators. Heat treatments. These are used. This is quite an environmental friendly way. If you do have problems with wood borers, with museum pieces, things like heat treatment, but more commonly nitrogen and carbon dioxide. Yuri, who's on ICOMOS International Committee, I don't know if he's with us, but he's done a lot of work, a lot of very interesting work with nitrogen, carbon dioxide. I was chatting with him a couple of months ago. So that's really it. It's just to sort of promote a discussion to try and understand each of the elements of the biodeterioration, the material, the organism, and measures that might be open to you that don't necessarily have to use a chemical. It's always down to water. It's always down to moisture. And you mustn't get distracted by somebody telling you we need to kill everything first and then think about what's going on. It's the other way around. You need to think about what's going on and then possibly kill things in a very localized and controlled way using the right biocide that's not going to cause a problem anywhere else. So that is it.
Fantastic, Tim.